Afternoon, everyone. You've come to the show, Edge of Truth Radio Show. We're really happy to have all of you with us here in the afternoon. We started a little bit late today because of people coming back in from out of town. I'm sure all of you can identify with that. So I hope you're having a good holiday today, celebrating the 4th. Our show today is Understanding the Responsibility of and for Freedom.
Ooh.
So that's going to be very interesting as we get into the dialogue here. Our show hosts here are Sharon Quinn and Tryson Graham.
Hello.
Hi.
Again, we're broadcasting here internationally. We hope all of you are enjoying it all over the world, which is really cool to be able to be sitting in your studio at home.
Yeah.
So anyway, happy to have all of you with us here today. Sharon, you want to get into any of the program here that you want to talk about?
Okay. Did you want to do the checking while I was doing the talking? It would be easier. Okay, so alrighty. So I'll start out a little bit while we have our technical person make sure that we are getting to everybody, because that's so important. We're not doing this for no reason. We're doing this for you. And what's really important is education is still very much a topic we want to keep talking about. But today we wanted to shift the focus a little bit more to freedom, because this is the 4th of July weekend. And it is about the essence of what freedom is. How does freedom work? What is its value to us personally, as a society, and as a world? Does it have any importance in education and business? These are kinds of things that we think are good to have a nice little discussion about. And join us. Please ask us questions, make your comments, and we'll try to keep up with you as much as we can. Is there anything you'd like to say on our intro here, Tryson?
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks for joining us. I hope you all enjoyed this discussion about freedom as much as we're going to. Our conversations always end up very exciting and very productive. We are here thinking about solutions, and I like to think about what we're doing here as building context toward a lot of the lessons that we all need to learn, especially those in my generation who haven't learned them yet, and those even myself, for lessons that I haven't learned yet, giving myself a better context for understanding those, grasping and incorporating them into my life. So I hope you're able to do that as well.
And you know, there's the truth in learning is a never-ending, it's an everlasting aspect of being an intelligence. And we are all instilled with this intelligence that I see very clearly is our spirit intelligence. It is actually the core intelligence that is behind our intellectual abilities. And if that's an eternal aspect of ourself, and it is, learning and growing the ability to expand our thinking capacities has to be part and parcel of all of that. If I've always loved the phrase, when you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you rot. That's a lesson straight out of nature, who is ever perennial, ever growing herself, ever evolving herself, and she doesn't stay in a box. She doesn't get caught up in opinions. She doesn't get caught up in fear paradigms, and she doesn't get caught up in a fear of change. And freedom ultimately is always evolving with change. The two words, you almost can't separate them from each other. And I never even really thought about how intricately they're related till just this moment when I heard myself saying it. But how could you have freedom, which is movement, and change not being part of that? It's almost impossible. And as nature, plants a seed, if it just stayed a seed, no growth occurs. If nature plants a seed and only puts down roots, well, still don't get the shoot coming up. And so the shoot coming up then has to keep changing, and it has to keep growing. And we've got some things that on this planet that are awesome, like redwood trees. What Kwong was telling us, that he wanted to see one that was 5,000 years old. That's older than humanity.
5,000 years.
Wow. That's older than humanity, right? I think so.
Well, that's what they tell us.
That's what they tell us.
Right.
We should ask the bacteria that and the viral
Viruses.
foundation that Dr. Zach Bush talks about, and ask if they know if that's correct or not.
Yeah, really.
We just
Does
have-
anyone know?
Exactly.
Yeah,
What do we know?
really know?
I guess if we're honestly humble, that's the question we would always sit before us. What do we not know, and what yet is for us to know? And that leads us to a very good question. Thinking, right? In a free world, we have to think. Responsibility implies thinking. And yet, thinking seems to be something we don't give a whole lot of thought to anymore. I mean, even education pulls out critical thinking skills. And we let it happen. We gripe about it. We bitch about it. We say we don't like it. But do we actually get in front of the school administration and say, you will put critical thinking back into this curriculum? And we are not going to take no for an answer? That is part of what our child needs to know and learn? No, we kind of throw our hands up. This goes now to responsibility and freedom, doesn't it?
I think what's very interesting here on this topic today is the other day Sharon was in her bank, and
Yeah, she had to
she
go and
kinda
get one
got
just like everybody
irate
else.
got irate with the bank period.
Hmm.
And anyway, we're going into a realm here of freedom, and part of that freedom is making some well-balanced choices. So the bank had that day dictated to their employees that you have to wear a mask for the virus situation. We're not necessarily going to get off into the virus thing, but it's the point of reference here, and what Tristan was talking about things in context, because the people didn't want to wear them, the manager didn't want to wear them, so they had no choice. So their choices were actually taken, their constitutional rights were taken away from them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they had no choice. So Sharon calls the upper guys at wherever they are.
We now
And-
call it corporate.
Corporate.
headquarters.
And just kind of laid down the law of how much her and I didn't really like it, because I go in there periodically too. But point being is that, and we're going to go back to thinking, critical thinking skills. Well, the bank wasn't even putting any critical thinking skills into their dictation to their employees. They just said, well, the CDC is saying this. Okay, so you don't even get a choice. You either do it or you don't have a job. That's ridiculous.
And what was interesting was, in my conversation with corporate, I presented some very serious questions. I said, why are you violating the constitutional rights of anybody? And they went, what? I said, you do realize that by mandating that somebody do and behave a certain way to keep their job, or that somebody to access their money in the bank has to put on a mask, let's say, because that was the issue. And I said, you're mandating our health, you're mandating our freedom, and you're overriding it all based on what? It's not a law. The CDC only offers a guideline. They do not have the rule of law. They do not supersede the Constitution. I said, so what? Are you non-American? Do you not support the Constitution? They about had a heart attack. No, we're very much for the Constitution. No, we don't want to violate anybody's rights. I says, then why are you doing it? They didn't realize, they didn't think to investigate or understand our Constitution, and that's what part of freedom and responsibility is about today, to actually have thought out far enough. Did the CDC have the legal authority to make people criminals if they did not follow their suggestion? Well, their research also validated, oh my God, it was just a suggestion. And why was corporate choosing to take a suggestion over constitutional rights? What ended up happening, long story short, was they rose to honor the freedom and the constitutionality and just say, if you want to wear one, you can, and if you don't want to, you're not mandated.
Okay, but
Victory for freedom and
one of the big
thinking.
deals here was
Choice.
this
Mhm,
was
choice.
the next day.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, they hadn't had anybody wearing these for months, the whole time frame.
Yeah.
And so then they did it one day. Sharon went in there, and then apparently there was a bunch of other people that said the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what we're talking about here is, you do have a choice if you want to wear them, fine. We're talking about, are you really involved in any critical thinking skill? What are you doing? Because obviously the corporation wasn't thinking past where we're in phase 3 or 4, whatever that's all about.
Right. And they weren't thinking in relationship of what was what. I mean, we're in a country that has this amazing document called the Constitution of the United States with a Bill of Rights attached to it. And it's there because our founding fathers realized that you had to have those so that the government didn't arbitrarily alter your life, your being, your freedom, your creativity, and your enjoyment of a quality life. And we've lost sight of that in 200 years, from the founding fathers to now. And all of this is forcing us to rethink. What are we doing? What is the responsibility of freedom? How precious is freedom? What does it give us? What happens when we take it away? What do we lose? There's a lot for us to think about.
Well, if you think about it in the sense of, we're here on a planet, we're here in the universe, or at least that's what we call it, and we've organized it to a certain degree to give everybody those rights and freedoms to the point that they can do what they need to do to become, like Sharon was talking about, become creatively expressive, not overriding other people's rights, keeping everything within a boundary of law and order. But in reality, we're free, period. Okay, but we still have to have the inner responsibility and inner reflection as to my next action.
And we need to know why we're taking our next action. And it seems like understanding freedom and understanding the responsibilities of freedom are something we've kind of separated out as different fragments of a piece of pie. But when we separate things and we put them into fragments, we start what I like to call skating on a fragment. Then we lose sight of the perspective of the holism, of what it fits into, because everything interrelates with everything else. Whether we want to believe that or not doesn't change that reality. We're a unity of oneness and consciousness. We talk about ourselves as a united states. We talk about these ideas of united and holism and oneness, but then we kind of pull out a fragment and let the oneness just kind of fall off of our mind like a cliff and just start staring myopically at the fragment. Does this injure our thinking capacity? Or does it enhance our thinking capacity? What do you think?
Well, I think that's a really good example, because in doing that fragmentation, we obviously, if we've never even considered the holistic perspective of everything affecting everything else to a certain degree. So this shows you the whole thing of legislating laws, stuff like that. People like them or they don't like them. They affect everything we do. And so if you don't have any, well, Sharon and I are probably, and Trish going to get into more in a realm of presence, being present, because each individual, our educational system needs to get us more focused into being present. What are we doing in the moment? Because if we're not doing that, then these fragments become a lot more appealing.
And now just one more thing, Bill, to what you're saying. Not only are we present in the moment, What are we doing in interrelationship with the people who are also present with us in the moment? And the people who are with us in their heart, but might not be in the room with us.
That raises a question for me, Sharon, if
Sure.
you could expound on the idea of separation versus oneness a little bit, that and the way that it ties in.
Okay. And your question, and what's the most, that's such a big thing I could talk about from so many angles.
Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
struck you is in the more specific way about that question? Because it's a great question.
Well, how do I would ask it in the negative way first.
Okay.
How does a room full of people exist among one another and seemingly look at each other and still not ever come to be on the same page, or actually understand that they're one with the person next to them, and the well-being of one of their classmates is actually the well-being of
All of
the
them.
entire class.
Okay. Tyson gets an A for asking really big questions. But it's a great
I
question.
have a little background information.
But you know, that is a big question, and it's requires several fragments to be put together to answer it. Isn't that interesting? Because you can't answer it with one piece of a fragment. So to answer that question, we have to start actually with the whole, then look at the fragments that are involved. Why? Because the whole is our cohesive understanding. If we try to take things whole, then we have the ability to be working from something with nothing hidden, nothing missing, and everyone included. The only way we could go to everybody in the room having, like, let's say, a win-win outcome is if everyone is considered. So if our baseline is everyone is considered, everyone has to get to the same page. We have to figure out now, how are we all going to get to the same page? Okay? How are we going to come together rather than keep drifting apart? How are we going to bring our individual fragments into the whole? When we start with the idea of the whole, the assumption is it's all going to fit. We can come together. That's a very positive, compelling viewpoint. And it goes to our heart that can say, love. Love is the inclusive cohesion, and it's the glue that holds the holism together. Not intellectual property, not intellectual ideas. The intellectual ideas need to come and sit back at the center point where love is. Because love is the primary core that holds that holism together always. Now, the opposite of love is fear. Fear dissipates. Fear starts cracking things up. Fear starts contracting itself and pulling fragments out and then putting a circle around them and contracting them and contracting them and contracting them. Fear is not famous for opening up our heart. I don't think that's a big argument that we have to work at real hard. Fear makes us shrink. Fear makes us myopic. And fear makes us afraid of the oneness. Okay? So it's good for us to juxtapose the very bottom lines. And the bottom lines are, we do want to work, if we're going to talk oneness and holism, we need to talk what holds holism and oneness together. It's love. Fear will never hold a cohesive thing together. It will always end up attacking every other piece of itself, because fear becomes very myopic, very contracted, till it's me, 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 me. So it's all where it just breaks. It doesn't have the ability to come together, because as closeness occurs, fear goes off the charts. Hysteria, chaos begins to occur. Now that brings up another powerful word about holism and oneness. We don't have chaos, we have harmony. And harmony forms on my willingness to want to understand our impact upon each other, and to understand it correctly, not from my fragment, not from my fear point, but from the point that says essentially we're meant to be one. So how do we get there? It changes our questions. It changes our orientation. Did that help at all?
Yeah, and it brings me back to presence.
Okay.
That was
All right.
sort of where we kicked off for that question.
Okay, cool.
And so it makes a lot of sense how the presence and love of each of us allows us to connect and click into that oneness.
Oneness is something that forces us to really look responsibly at freedom. Because love knows that it can't expand that oneness, that holism, to be greater, to expand and take in more, unless it loves. Because love means we've been working with each other and we can trust each other. Trust is built. Trust is not a blind faith. Hey, Dyson, I'm just immediately going to trust you. No, I want to trust you, Tyson, the minute I saw your smiling face. But we have to build a relationship. And we need to be working with each other and see how we're responsive or how we're not responsive, or how selfish we are, or how we're willing to open up our selfish box and relate to each other, on and on and on and on. And then we forge through some of our pain and some of our differences, and how we work those differences to keep us in the same room together, working together, and not have to make each other like each other. Oneness doesn't mean we have to become carbon copies of each other. Hell no. I like to think about it the way I think about who we are as a human. The breath, the hue, the spirit is one beautiful diamond of the Creator. And the Creator envisioning itself as every other human being on the planet, expressing that divine quality. And each one of us is, as from this particular metaphor that I love so much because it's so beautiful, nobody's been able to get upset with this metaphor yet. But then you have the one, which is the Creator, looking out and saying, I've got this beautiful diamond and all these human beings. I'm so vast. I'm so great. How many people are on the planet? I don't know. I can't even keep count. I don't even know the number. It's so big for me.
7.5 billion.
Oh, Will loves numbers. 7.5 billion and growing, which means the Creator has 7.5 billion facets to begin to even express a mere aspect of itself as a human being. And it's always evolving and always growing. Oh my God, that is such an awesome thought. Oh my Lord, how great thou art. We can see where that comes from, right? I mean, just that idea is awesome. To think about that and go to sleep with that idea makes you think about humanity and our human spirit as something beautiful. And yes, Holly, we love you too. We have somebody named Holly Lynn who came in, and I could see that on there. I can't see everything, but I could see that part. And so what we're looking at is saying each facet is different from the other facet, or we wouldn't have the brilliance of the light refracting, that one light refracting from all those different angles of perception. So that implies we'll have different angles of perception, but still be the diamond, still be a circle. And each of us is a different facet, but we are never meant for a facet to be separated. Well, one, whereas I can make a pie and cut a piece out and throw it out and fractionate it out. Oh, I have a fractioned piece out. We can't do that to a diamond. The diamond is whole. And so it's easier for us to realize that the idea that we can construct in our mind that fantasizes I can separate oneness and be a bunch of fragments is more of a delusional idea, an illusional idea, but it's not correct. It will fall apart and break down because it's that idea contracts it from all the light and love that's coming from the oneness.
And it's rampant as well, the isolation.
Oh, yes.
That comes from being separated really in consciousness from those, who, first of all, who are directly in front of you,
Mm-hmm.
and then those that are in your life that you maybe have withdrawn from.
Yes.
There's one could withdraw out of those relationships, or over time have them be distanced, and eventually the relationships fall away. And that type of separation is very prominent in where we're going. People that do healthy things regularly are still very separated.
Well, you brought up two really big, beautiful concepts that are just tied into this: isolation and health. Oneness, holism, is health. It nurtures, it's self-nurturing. And the word harmonizing means everything's nurturing everything else. And by nurturing everything else and being in agreement to work together, we have a trust, because we don't have any part separating itself out, gunking up and creating a gap that might cause a collapse in one part of the holism. Very simple way to look at it. But it's accurate. That puts us into an accurate thinking about oneness, holism, love, unity, and cohesiveness. Okay? And we should never really, if we want to have good clarity of thought, break away from that bottom line. Because that bottom line is correct and it all goes together whether we like it or not. Well, that's a whole other conversation. But what is, and what ain't, as they would say more in Oklahoma than in Michigan, where I'm originally from, but you know. and so isolation is not natural. I mean, there was this one of the nicest scientific ways I've heard somebody talk about it recently was a doctor named Zach Bush, I believe his name is. And he was talking about how isolation is anti-human. It's destructive to human happiness and human mental health, and human health, period. And he's talking, of course, from a biology and whole standpoint that's much more scientific, but science that aligns with the eternal nature of who we are. And this oneness idea is science that is beginning to come, quantumly speaking and holistically speaking, to the higher understandings of what we can do with this amazing amount of knowledge that we have. If science tries to extrapolate one piece, like has been where science has been going, for the most part, we can never really come to a great answer. And then everybody knows this. I mean, you can have one scientific research that says this diet is what you need to be healthy. And we all know there's probably 100 diets that different scientific studies said are workable and are the right one. And we have thousands of people who say, well, that's crap. Maybe a diet works for one person, but it doesn't work for another. This is the idea of trying to solve problems in isolation, trying to solve ideas on a fragment, and not getting to the whole idea of holism, the interrelationship we are all sharing. What was working in one and why wasn't working for another? If we never lost sight of the holism, we'd probably figure out why we have all these discrepancies in diet validities.
Yeah, and it could possibly help you make sense of the response, CDC response to the coronavirus epidemic.
Yes.
Masks.
Yes.
Work is what they at first I think they said that masks don't work, so don't buy them, and then they changed their mind. Now
they
it's
do
mandatory.
Work.
Now it's not only
okay. So in looking at it that way, where is the actual proof that they work or don't work? And so you've got all these fragmentations of opinions. And so it's like sharing in the bank and a couple other places we've been into, and they've all mandated it. And so,
oh, by the way, to that story, they removed the mandate.
Well,
when they started thinking about
we were always
what they were doing with
other
it.
retail places, and they don't. So when we went in, they went, "You got to wear a mask." So, well, you don't want our business.
Yeah, walk right out.
Is this a business or is this some kind of control grid here now? It's like, it's just like it's almost evil in the sense of they're using it to control us.
Well, it becomes more and more apparent. And if you keep thinking of holism, it makes it easier to see where a discrepancy of thought is occurring. Because a holism it all integrates together. It all fits somehow. You don't have completely things that don't fit. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. If I've got 5 jigsaw puzzles and they're all thrown in one box, I can force some pieces together, but eventually I'm going to realize I got pieces that aren't supposed to be there. The puzzle is what the puzzle is. And we have to be mature enough to accept that. So we'd have 5 holisms in that case, right? And we need to be able to differentiate one puzzle from another puzzle. Now, in terms of humanity, and we need to also bring in with this idea of holism, the greater good of all. Because that implies something we need to understand about a holism, doesn't it? The greater good of all. What does that mean? Well, that can be a rather complex conversation. But the greater good of all would mean that every facet would be allowed to choose its own development, its own growth, its own mistakes within the whole and still be loved. It wouldn't be still isolating itself out. We would be accepting within the holism. Now, when we say something that would attack the greater good of all, Will brings up the word evil, a word we have used for that. I call that starting to put in the energy veil where we cannot see each other. Okay? And that would be, to me, what is evil. It says, I want to break the holism, and I want to serve just my facet and make that the whole new holism. Everybody come to my narcissistic creation here. Okay? And I can force you to do it if I have enough money and power.
So that's you're bringing in the separation.
Yes, but that's not a true holism supported by the Creator in the universe. That would be a false, contrived, and it would always require force to hold it together. A forcing of against the will. Okay? A true holism that is aligned and in harmony with the Creator holds itself naturally together on a love. Well, love means there's a consideration for everyone. I mean, it's its own self-correcting cohesion, glue, so to speak. It's amazing. I mean, I just don't think we're going to outdo the Creator. I mean, I just don't think there's a human being on the planet who is going to outdo the Creator's genius, the Creator's a magnificent intelligence for beauty and holism. And when we are fully aligned with that love, from the perspective that I can see from self-gnosis, we can be magnanimously free and creative beyond our wildest imaginations and not have any fear of each other, have absolutely no hate of each other, but a deep appreciation for all of our wonderful, amazing differences. That's how harmony works. That's a form of blending. Now, because intelligence is the core concept, not the core concept, it's the core reality of what our Creator is, and we know that the intelligence of the Creator is an intelligence because look at how ordered and amazingly this universe is. I mean, scientists, and you listen to some quantum physicists who talk about it, Hagelin being one that I particularly find amazing and humbling to listen to because you can hear his voice. He just says, oh my God, it's so together. He says, it's so beautiful, it's so amazing that you can't wrap your head around it. You're always wrapping your head around it. Because it's bigger and greater than you could ever be in just your own little mind up here. Now that's beautiful. That's a recognition of a holism from a very, very big picture. And the further up you can go like a spiral to look at this holism, the more you can see it more encompassingly, more beautifully, more broadly. And you realize that the greater good of all is freedom. Is very much freedom is there. Because that is where potential is free to create. Okay, and that's where health is, because you don't have false ideas contracting. And anything that wants to contract like that opposes love, has got to be at its essence what? Fear. Now, fear, I don't know about you, but I'm not particularly interested in living in fear. I'm not particularly interested in building my life around a fear core. I realize this world is in a lot of chaos, and I don't personally see that as the Creator's creation. I see that as humanity being really confused and being really interested in being right. Very much an ego-minded grappling and space. And if I got to be right, then I've juxtaposed myself to right and wrong, not correct and incorrect. There's a huge difference. Can you see the difference between them?
Well, I think one of the things that we really need to focus on here too is principles.
Of course.
Well, I mean, putting it in that context, a lot of people can look at this conversational. I mean, what's the principle we're talking about here? Freedom.
Keep your voice up. Freedom.
Your soul's freedom. It has nothing to do with the government, anybody else.
That's right. That's right.
It's to do with your spiritual connection to Source. And so some of the things that fall out of it are freedom, love, commonality of understanding. Understanding is a big principle. You understand, you get more into getting into that. It's being principle of staying centered. Principle of we don't really want to hurt anybody.
And just a little sideline and go back, but understanding implies what?
Thinking.
Voila! That's right. No thinking, no understanding, right?
Yes.
We just accept. Well, you don't want to accept something without thinking. As the universe's center, with being that big broad principle of being an intelligence, pretty much tells us, oh my God, all my empowerment and all my responsibility is I must always think.
Yeah. And
I must think.
Also, how might the thinking process change if you are not only considering viewpoints from all over, but also if you shift from thinking outside of terms of right and wrong?
Well, you know, you bring up a point that makes me go to education. Oh, there's my default. But if we look in terms of thinking, and education, really good education starts, we realize that we start working with training our babies, our children, how to think, how to relate to this world. Because, I mean, they come in wide-eyed, wondered, and they've got this body and this computer up here that they're turning on, and it's, you know, and they're getting used to all this. Well, their spirit presence is taking quite a while to adjust to this amazing biological body, okay, and the way it's functioning, and basically looking through the eyes into what we'll hear over and over again is a third-dimensional illusion. Now, we try to wrap our head around that, and it's very confusing because I can touch him and say, he's an illusion? Oh my God! Oh, my brain blows away. But if I'm thinking that what's really my reality isn't the body isn't what's so important, but it's that consciousness, that spirit that's breathing my breath and breathing your breath and allowing us to have this amazing conversation, and to think and to ponder more deeply about principle, which is going back to spirit, okay? And what are the principles of spirit? Well, from a thinking standpoint, the one thing that school has dropped out is understanding what comprises thinking that is really healthy or unhealthy thinking. Well, thinking that looks at a premise, because you're going to run logic off of a premise at all times. That's what the brain does. That's how we think. But if you don't examine the validity of the premise, then everything that falls from that premise is going to be incorrect when you arrive at your conclusion. You will get to a conclusion. It will be logical, but it won't be correct. It'll be a false concept, a false construct, a false idea. Whoa. Okay. This is important to think about. Okay. Come back. Before you go and do all that heavy thinking, keep examining how accurate Not how much do I believe, not how much do I like, not how much do I hate this premise. How accurate is this premise, and how do I know it's accurate based upon what? And I better use my 360 circle and look at the pros and cons. If I don't look at the arguments on both sides, I'm only getting half a story. Duality, can't throw that out. That's one of the principles of the universe. I know I just threw in another one from holism, but but it's key to comprehending why we must examine a premise and how to appropriately examine a premise so that we can start saying, aha, I don't have enough information on this premise yet to see it 360. If I see it 360, then I can know it's false or true. I can know that it has validity or not. Then I have a wonderful thought premise to build my logic upon to go bigger into the bigger circle for the greater good of all. Will.
Well, so if one of the things we were talking about was fragmentation of the whole. So a lot of stuff it goes in down this alley that you're talking about here of it's not correct.
Mm-hmm.
What was it based on? It was based on a belief. So your beliefs better be a lot more aligned with principle and reality. Now, we don't necessarily know. We don't have a definition of reality. We call this reality. Okay, that's it. It's a word, and it's a conceptual word that we've created because we had to have some way of relating to this. Okay, whatever this is.
Our brain demanded that.
Our brain demanded that, okay, well, it's definitely that. But if you look at it that way, a belief can just be a blind alley. And look at it. Look how much the scientific theorems and quantum now and going on, they've all changed. They were built on certain belief structures from certain inquiring minds, obviously. So if your conceptual line of thinking is based on a certain belief structure, you're into the fragmentation because that belief structure doesn't necessarily have to mean anything. It can just be what you believe. And people do it all day long with the mind's meaning-making machine.
Yeah, the
I call
mind
it the
is
4M. They don't know they're doing it all day long. You know, this is what we were talking to Andrew about that one.
Yeah. Well, partly because it's not really them doing it; it's an automatic.
Yeah, it's automatic.
Mind
Exactly.
runs in the background.
Right.
And if you're not aware of it, you might think that your life is going south or off the rails.
And it
but
may not be.
It might not.
You're just believing it
Probably
is.
isn't.
Oh my God, this is going on. So that doesn't mean anything conclusive is happening.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I was wanting to throw in there was the whole belief trail. I mean, like Sharon's talking about, the baby coming in wide-eyed. You know, okay, what am I doing here? I don't even have that to question with. I don't even know what I'm doing here.
right, and
So
that
it's all
mind.
based on those, the belief structures of your parents, of institutions, of the government, political blah. Well, if you take that all seriously,
Yeah.
then you've got a trail of stuff you haven't even inspected, let alone critical thinking.
Right.
It's just, oh, that's the way it is, It's like, you're Southern Baptist, well, everything's going to happen this. Really? It's a belief.
It's a belief. And we have to maintain that responsibility to think. And we have to
Stay aware.
maintain that responsibility and allow freedom for everybody to have their beliefs if we want to be in a free society. Eventually, we may all come to realize that we may say, okay, I've decided that I'm maturing and I'm coming further up the Maslow pyramid of my needs, and I'm more out of survival and I'm more out of psychology, and now I'm really realizing I'm moving into self-actualization, and I am concerned about the bigger picture. I am concerned about principle rather than just get, have, eat, do, shelter, me, you. these things going up, okay, as we integrate this greater growth. Now, when a baby is born, one of the amazing things is that spirit is eternal, has a phenomenal amount of awareness, and it is somewhat trapped in a body-mind for a computer to come back online and to start connecting, and for the brain to start turning on all its different areas so that the mind can, that spirit can function on its own with critical thinking in that machine. Okay, because that's a whole different machine. It's very limited. I can tell you our presence, from my after-death experience, our presence is very free. And the body is like a girdle, a tight one at that. But it's a wonderful vehicle to experience this third dimensional world on Mother Earth's platform, which is a third dimensional reality. It's a virtual reality. Okay, and we can understand virtual realities nowadays because we have computers that are having us live in virtual reality. Okay, we couldn't understand virtualness until the advent of the computers, and really until the advent of the PC that we could work with, and even more so with the invention of virtual reality games. Then it got real clear how somebody could get into a virtual reality, over-identify with the virtual reality, because there's actually people who have psychological problems getting so identified with their virtual reality that they don't want to live in their external virtual reality, which is, I mean, they don't even want to be in touch with their presence. It gets pretty interesting, doesn't it? Okay. Going a little off tangent, but not completely.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but duality you refer to as the master key.
Yes.
The master key unlocking. Well, in your book, Unearthing.
Yes, there it is. Yep.
Preface to Your Eternity. You talk about the master key, duality, and well, here's the book. Here's this.
Filled with little note markers.
preface, and the Tao is talking
That's
about
the first page.
Oh, cool.
That's the front piece, so it's after you have to get past the things that our world asks for.
So what I was just thinking of is it's not only a concept that's central to duality, but this reality that we're talking about, it's central to understanding this reality.
Yes.
And making sense of things that sometimes don't make sense and lead you down the frustrating path of mind,
one-sidedness.
meaning making machine.
Yeah, that's
Right,
one-sidedness. Or that fractionates. I mean, if you take something whole, you cut it in half, now you've got a really big fraction, a half, that you plopped off on one side. Yeah, that's a big...
Yeah.
And yes, it's true, and it's beautiful that you've brought that up, and because in truth, if we're looking at the whole, every time you're looking at anything, because we have 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, 2 hands, the whole body is designed, and Michelangelo does a beautiful design of the body and of the divine man, as I think he called it. We see half, and the other half, and it mirrors the other half. Well, science and things like that have started to call it like a duality idea. Duality. And that we're really an energy field, and there's this duality, this juxtaposition of 2 ideas, 2 opposing things. Well, we see it with even like 2 political systems primarily, okay? We see everything going 2s. We have the integral 2 of day and night, top and bottom, left and right, up and down, whatever you want to call it, right? We see this natural encoding in the world with this duality. And then we find ourselves formulating things, and we don't always look at, and if we would train ourselves to always say, duality has something primary to do with my understanding a whole at all times, holism at all times. Okay? If I can't see the diametrically opposing ideas, I cannot see the holism. And I cannot find the middle balance point between the two. See? That balance point is where it's a little bit of this, it's a little bit of that. A little bit of the left, a little bit of the right. Because the relativity lives on the crux of it depends.
Okay,
Here's
now
the
let's
picture.
go in. That's this is Sharon's first book, The Big If in Life. Now the dial that you see there is exactly what, it's kind of a symbolic of what she's talking about, down the middle. Okay, it's
That's
that balance point between source and life and death, we'll call it.
That would be a very primal Tao. But if we're just talking like looking at even a premise, okay, you're going to always have to look for its yin-yang, its left-right, its whole thing to a holism. And its center point is where you want to be. And what's at the center point when I do the holism? Love. Okay? Love, holism, will be at the center point of what appears to be two opposites. Because they aren't really there, because it's that illusion idea. Now we're getting to be the type of thing where some people are going, whoa, you're bending my mind. And yes, it will bend the mind, because the mind is freaked out and doesn't naturally resonate with this like awareness. You know what part of you resonates with this awareness and understands it with absolutely no difficulty whatsoever? Your presence, your spirit, who you are, knows that, recognizes it, and knows that there's only one place to be at the center point. Balance. And in relativity, balance goes like this. A little left, a little right, a little left, a little right. And now it all depends on a bunch of circumstances. What makes something right in one circumstance and wrong in another. That's where we get the right-wrong idea that so many people get caught up on and religions just pounced on as a primary way in which to form a canon of laws that says this is the way the universe is. But it is man-made interpretation of divine what is, those principles.
Well, you talked about it earlier in the sense that we got to bring ourselves in a harmonic resonance. So if we looked at it, we got two eyes, two ears, two. So we got two halves of our brain. So we've got to bring our physiology and our harmony of our emotions and our mental world into this. If we can get into this harmonic resonance, things make more sense spiritually, because that's where that's your true nature anyway, is your spirit nature. And if you're confused, you can get off into one side of some kind of dual perspective your whole life. I mean, that's fragmentation right there. You know, you don't look at yourself really good. Or I've known people that just depressed, you know, and they live this whole thing as their existence. Well, they're obviously lopsided.
Well, depression is a form of isolation, according to Dr. Bush, which I like the way he explained it, because he gave it an idea from a scientific standpoint that a lot of people could initially relate to, but it's a perfect match. And that's really cool. I love stuff like that, because it helps people get to a bigger concept, like you're saying, or the context of a bigger idea with something that they're more familiar with, from science into the bigger concept and context of, oh, my presence. Because that really will never have a manifested reality while we're here in the third dimensional world, because it has no form. We're pure energy. But our pure energy is in concretized vehicles and forms that are aligned with those principles. Okay.
So meaning that you can't see it and touch it like you can with your physical body.
Right.
But it's no less real.
And you know how I can see it? Looking in your eyes. Seeing your smile. All right.
Right.
These are beautiful things.
Humanness.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even when I see a dog and he comes up and he's looking me eye to eye, I see a presence, dog presence, and then we're testing each other out. Are we friends? You know, and we come to some understanding.
No, we're not friends. But...
Okay. All right, now I got to exert a little bit more ki through those eyes and let that dog know I am in charge of the whole.
Yeah.
You will not hurt me.
Right.
You know, and we see people, and anybody who owns animals and stuff will say, you know, that's true. You see the animal go and size somebody up, and you'll see on some people the dog will back off.
Yes.
On some, the dog will just go rabid on top of somebody. You know, we ascribe our own meanings to what we think's going on there. But we can see this exchange of energies and presence.
Yeah.
And the more we're honest and say, let's really try to figure this out. What am I really seeing? And not just jump to, I'm gonna define that. You know, but that means we have to have what I call holy curiosity, where we're always willing to look at something and weigh it and figure it out and say, is this what it means? Is that what it means? I think this is what it means. Let me see if this bears out over time. Okay? Because over time, more feedback will come our way. And but we got to be very careful, because if we're hung up on, I'm going to only look for validation to what I already think to prove I'm right, now I'm going to attract half. That duality. I'm not going to attract the whole, because my mind isn't open-ended. My mind is only seeking to prove that I'm right, not did I get this right. Can you see the difference? It sounds subtle, but it's all the difference in the world.
Well, I think a lot of it gets into something that Tryson kind of touched on, was because we're in the 3D world, we tend to get addicted to and distracted by things, objects. And so our spiritual source presence is always the case. It already is the case, or we wouldn't be alive. Okay, it is our source energy. So if we keep getting distracted by the world, it's kind of like, we'll use one of Jesus' or Christ, be ye in the world, but not of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but what is he saying? He's saying, don't get distracted by this world. Okay, you're beyond this, and what I'm trying to get across to you is beyond this. So if you get distracted by objects,
or ego, need to be right, or survival
thing,
alone,
or the conceptual objects, you get caught up in the intellectual bantering within yourself and with other people, then you're still distracted.
Right.
I mean, you haven't gone beyond what to recognize that presence is already your nature. It's already with you. It always has been with you, and never will not be with you.
You know, all of this is pretty cool stuff, really, and it's also very heavy and deep. We agree. But there's a lot here to chew on. I mean, you would not waste your time listening to some of the things we talked about here, stopping one sentence and chewing on it for a week. Until it kind of made some sense, or you said, okay, I chewed on what I think this means, and now let me see what the next part is, or whatever. I mean, this is pure, some people might want to call pure gold, okay? Because we're really talking about the heart and center and the core of something to think about. I have no interest in persuading you to think one way or the other. I would like you to look at holism and the quality of your thinking and your thoughts, so that you can be ultimately free. So that you can open your mind and heart in a way that allows you to allow every other human being on the planet to be in your sphere without hating. To be able to hold them in the holism. Now, I know some people are going to say, okay, Sharon, that sounds like crap, okay? What about somebody who is a very hateful person who, I'm going to just go and take an extreme, because extremes make the point easy to comprehend. So what about somebody who is molesting children, putting them in child trafficking rings? We know this shit's going on. Yeah, we do. And I know, and I've talked to some people who, for a living, were tracking these people down. And those people had to have strong hearts. I mean, really strong hearts. And they verified that, how much this is really happening. Okay, made my heart sad. Made it hard. Okay? But the truth of the matter is, how do I hold that in this holism if love is at the center? It's a good question, isn't it? Does that validate what I just said? Does that make me two-faced and a liar? Good question. And I think you should ask that question. So let me attempt to answer that and see if it makes sense to you. Do I like that there are such people out there? Absolutely not. Their behavior choices are unacceptable. Absolutely, totally, and completely unacceptable. They are engaged in a behavior that I could say, from a yin-yang standpoint, is absolutely on the extreme. It's way over, like this. Okay? And in that regard, it's extremely imbalanced. It has no resonance with the Creator. Therefore, it has no resonance with the true love that's cohesively holding everything together. Their behavior is actually putting a lot of stress on that love, on that oneness, and creating voids and gaps and big holes in the oneness, upon which many people fall down in a rabbit hole. Okay? Very much they're feeding fear, which is attempting to try to attack the love at the center. Real love. Okay? The love that is in the world but not of it. That is divine and knows every facet of the diamond is still an aspect of God, even if it is so confused and so completely out of balance that at the moment it's almost blind and almost has no resonance with the Creator. Am I making sense in that?
Well, I think in that respect with the child trafficking and everything, that's a direct attack and violation of innocence.
Oh, absolutely.
And so we need to really, I'm thinking there are organizations that are more involved, but everybody needs to be aware that this is going on, and it needs to be stopped, because I think a lot of stuff is coming to light, obviously, in the government here now, and what's really been going on with some of the officials at the, we'll call it the elite ends, if you want to call them that. But to me, the big thing is the violation of the innocence of the individual soul, period.
And it is. And that kind of darkness actually needs to be, because it's so separated and almost has no feed of love, which is its original source. It has to pull that love from somewhere else, and the best place to get it is children. But I don't really want to go off on a tangent and get our listening audience off on that. I mean, that is shows and shows and shows on end that are worth talking about. But I would like to stay with just the concept of how it sounded as if I could be talking out of both sides of my mouth when I wasn't, to help give a bit of understanding that there is a lot of maturity about understanding so much more than we're going to cover in just this one show. I mean, we could spend months of looking at a paradigm that puts all this jigsaw puzzle together for us to understand a whole new way of viewing who we are in our modern society and still maintain the holism. But right now, I just did want to address the obvious elephant in the room, where somebody would have said, Sharon, it sure sounds like, from what I understand, that you could be not saying what you're saying.
Okay.
Did I kind of cover that? Without getting off into that as a subject
I didn't
matter.
want to get off into
Right,
it
but
either.
I understand what you're saying. But what you said added information
Right,
to
that's
understand
always,
that imbalance thing. They got to pull it. If somebody's way over here and almost got nothing, how are they maintaining their life? They're somehow stealing that energy from within the whole.
Well, they're violating the freedom of that soul.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally and completely. They're going to break every law and every universal principle in an attempt to maintain their completely out of balance, out of sync. Yep, that's okay. They're out of sync position. So, did that make sense?
Yeah.
Is there anything
Yeah.
you'd like to add to that to help our audience understand what we're talking about, or to better comprehend?
Yeah, there's this tangentially related concept that has to do with the idea. One of the ideas that you talked about, love,
Mm-hmm.
and love is very central to this discussion, because the evil things that are done by child traffickers,
Mhm.
child abusers, completely absent of love, and one book that really started to change for me was The Hidden Messages in Water.
Yes.
I can't recall the scientist that conducted these experiments.
Moto or something. Japan. He was from Japan.
But his experiments showed that love and gratitude produce some of the most beautiful water crystals, even if they were just written down on pieces of paper.
Yes.
Or just held inside the thoughts of one of the researchers, and then conducted the tests on water crystals. And love and gratitude were some of the most powerful forces to change. What he showed was they in fact changed the structure of the cells, that the water cells, and that they also in fact changed the structure of the water in our cells.
Yes.
For the better.
Yes.
So
affinity, alignment, bringing in that water would be talking to the other cells and going, oh, I could be in that shape, which is more natural. Thank you for the darkness in us, or the imbalance in us, or the sick in us. If it gets to see love and healthy, we'll gravitate towards that. It needs it as a model, though.
Yeah.
It needs to see it if it's lost its way.
Right.
Yeah. For those who aren't familiar with this book, it's lovely. It's just a beautiful book and an easy read. But those who are scientifically minded would appreciate that. Gives validity to what we're talking about here today. But he would show those cells of water under a microscope, and some of them were so deformed looking. And that same water being talked to and loved, even just holding your hands and loving the water and everything else. I mean, it wasn't anything really bizarre.
Right. Right.
Then they would retake that water and put it under the microscope, and you would see that the cells had realigned to give a different molecular structure, like beautiful star shapes, from warped to getting more and more harmony in the design. The designs were more harmonious because they were more balanced.
Right.
Yeah, it was amazing that he even thought to do that. I thought, wow, that's amazing.
Right. And so when we're talking about things like freedom and education, the ideas of love and positive thoughts and gratitude, presence and awareness of what your thoughts contain and where they're directed are super important. And it ties back to the responsibility of freedom too, because the freedom to think anything you want comes with the consequence of those thoughts shape who you are and how your life will go.
And what my heart holds, and I suspect it does for you two also, we just haven't said it out loud, is that this show acts a lot like his water experiments. By talking about principle and holism, we are helping your mind to have some nutrition to ponder and to look at, so that something inside of yourself can come forward and say, that eases this inside of me, or this opens a new way of thinking for me that helps me lift the lid off my box. Or to realize I have a lid on my thinking, and so I can uncontract it, I can open it, I can be freer, because freedom of your being able to think without fear, that's ultimately what we're talking about. And without fear, you can see things and open up to see what really is. Now, it doesn't mean everything we're going to see is going to turn us on, or we're going to love what we see. That's not what's important. What's important is that we can see without a blinder, because you can't fix something if you don't see it's broken. You can't give what you don't have, because how can you, right? And you can't take something up to another level if you yourself aren't going there yourself. I mean, these are just basic 101 facts of how things change, how things grow, how energy impacts others, how the human spirit influences others. I mean, when we're talking about war veterans and stuff, and the human spirit talks about the man who was brave enough to go do something everybody else was frozen solid, couldn't move or whatever, and one guy just, whatever was his verve that came from his spirit, was able to go and maybe grab somebody else out of another area and save their life and maybe save 5 other lives in the process. And then we want to give them medals for that because that's astounding to us. But that's love, and that is the power of getting beyond our fear. Correct? Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah.
Just as a note there, since we were talking about water and vibrations,
Mm-hmm.
apparently the body is like 70% water. So take that one in.
In Star Trek, we know that somebody from another world was alien was saying, "Yeah, ugly bags of water." So it's all in the eye of the beholder.
But if you look at the whole 70% essence there, then
Mm-hmm.
you are having to deal with a lot of that in a vibrational sense. That's what you're
Mm-hmm.
expressing in a sense. It's emotion, it's feelings.
And let's think about, Bruce Lee, somebody that was very wise, and we like to think about one of his offerings that he couldn't make enough. He said over and over in every way that he could in almost so many lectures or interviews more, be like water. He would always say that what everybody thought was magical was he had learned how to be like water. So if we're like water, does water resist everybody and everything? No, it opens. It says, let's go for a flow.
Yeah, it takes the
Let's
shape.
go for a flow. And by having a context like you were talking about, then the water takes a shape and moves somewhere. And if we can get the context aligned with universal principles, then the flows will be beautiful and they will be able to expand and grow without causing things like imbalances, like floods or droughts, but instead nourishing flows that keep everything going. Our body is filled with flows, life is filled with flows, conversation in many ways creates flows. And, with our idea of talking about freedom and its responsibility, possibly a good way to bring our final concept to understanding here for today would be, at the center of what we were talking about was love. And I know a lot of people would say, okay, this all makes a lot of sense. So, this whole freedom thing and this idea, I've seen people and I've been hearing people talk about, they don't like the idea of a freedom of medical choice, even though the founding fathers originally talked about it, because they narrowly come to a conclusion from what I've been hearing so far, and I'm open to hear a lot more of the conversation and would love to have more conversation because I think we got to have it, was, well, if you loved everybody else, you would not want to infect them, so you have to wear the mask. Whoa. And I thought, we have to examine what would bring that conclusion to be the meaning of love. Right? Is love that I'm more worried about a possibility of something that can happen to you? Is that the greater good of all? That even though I'm healthy, I should have to refrain myself? There's no reason for me to think that I'm going to hurt you, but to assume I probably am a walking danger zone? Is that love? What is my sense of worth for myself in the divine design that God created the body to have? I'd have to, at some level of my being, come to the conclusion that God didn't know what the hell he's talking about or doing in his divine design, because he created dangerous walking machines that infect other human beings within the whole. My God, we're all should be isolated. That's the conclusion I see from that. I see that as a love that is most likely sincere, but is it well informed? Does it really look at the 360, or is it looking at a fragment? Because I think to look at the 360, you have to include, we've always been living in an environment that, according to Dr. Zach Bush, was very clear, man, it's all virus and bacteria. They outnumber humans like in ways that would just blow our minds mathematically. And he just said, from the beginning of time, this body was designed to live in an environment and share all that and to work with it. And sure, sometimes there's disease when something first hits the stream, But the body very quickly finds a way to build antibodies and spare the whole. And then goes on and on and on. And our beautiful faces are part of what makes us so connected to one another. And it hurts me to go out and not see faces. I want to know who I'm looking at. I want to be able to remember you, and I remember your face. I'll remember your face way before I'll remember your name. But if I can't see your face, I can't know you're sad. I can't know you're happy. I can't. And what I used to do all the time when I'd go out shopping or anything else is I just had this desire in my heart to to lighten the suffering of humanity around me. I do education for that reason. Everything I do largely goes around that. And I would like people to be happier and more engaged and caring about themselves and trusting themselves. And so the whole idea would be, I could walk by somebody and I would just find myself letting my intuition speak, and I'd say something and they would turn and they would go, "Oh, thank you." And we would start to exchange something. And when I walked away from them, there became, and they were smiling. Now, I don't know how long that lasts, and I'm not all hung up on knowing what that was. But if that moment could seed something, I knew something had a chance of greater openness to seed for them. Now, is that helping alleviate suffering? I think we can do that. And I think it gives us joy to do that, whatever it is. But when we're all hiding ourselves away from each other, our ability to do that goes way down, doesn't it? We start getting giddy. I've never seen people get giddy. I mean, just walking by them, I see people jumping and doing stuff. It breaks my heart. This is not America. And this isn't who we were even 6 months ago. My God, we could not have become that much more crazy and dangerous to each other in just 6 months' time. I refuse to believe that. I refuse to believe that this 6 months has been so completely insane and violent to a point where it can undo thousands and thousands of years of human relating. I really don't think we're on the right track. And besides, now that we're in retrospect time, and I've got my mind open, and I've been listening to all kinds of people, it's just amazing to me to hear how many more doctors are coming forward and saying, we didn't have the facts. We were just following a theory, and we panicked. And yeah, that seemed like there was a lot of good reason to panic. But then we had evidence started coming in, proof started coming in, and we didn't want to let the panic go. What was that about?
Yeah, and I would ask you, what is the biggest threat that?
Yeah, I love that.
That's a good question. Just prioritize. Is COVID a greater threat than civil war?
Civil war. That's right. And have we considered in all of our thoughts how many people have been suffering because they couldn't and still can't get surgeries they've been needing for months? The number of people who, I was listening to somebody else who kind of overcame some of this, but they were older and they were, the hospital contracted them away and wouldn't let their family near them. And this person got through it and came back and said it was the most horrible time of their life, that they thought they were dying. And they couldn't believe they couldn't be with their loved ones, that their loved ones couldn't hold their hand, they couldn't be looking into their eyes, they couldn't be comforted by their presence, by their bedside. And then I began to realize a whole other level of suffering. And I thought nobody should have had to die alone. And that's what this person was saying, said I didn't. He said, but I was looking at the thought I would be dying alone, and how much I hated that I lived my whole life to be at this very ugly ending with no one. And I thought, wow, I never even thought about that. And so the more I've opened my mind to hear more of what people have had to say, the more I've realized the beauty of your question, Trison. What really are the bigger dangers, the bigger losses? Is it really that big of a loss? You look at the graphs in the chart, so what? The numbers are going up. People are getting it, so what? But the deaths are flatlined out. It's the deaths we're worried about, right? Right? That is our concern, not that something is going out. And we're contracted. We've been doing that our whole lives. I mean, if we watched every number of how many things we were exposed to, like how many people get measles every day or every month, or how many people get mumps, or how many people get the common cold, or anything else, we'd be overwhelmed with figures that would make us probably be freezing our spot and want to shoot ourselves. Oh my God, life is so dangerous. I don't think, if we're looking at the whole picture, that looking at one myopic piece at a time gives us the perspective we need to see the love and to answer the big question Trison was asked. What is the real loss or the real concern that we need to be having here?
Because we face so many threats.
Yes.
We face a lot of significant threats in our loved ones and family.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yes.
Not only us who are in the room, but us as Americans, black, white,
Green, purple.
green, people of all colors are facing all kinds of threats. And we do really need to know that while COVID is a threat, where does it stand in relation to all of the things that we're facing, and how do we remain calm?
You just brought up perspective. Where does it relate in
Yeah.
relationship to everything else? That's a holism viewpoint. We have to look at, especially serious things, but everything gives us proper perspective when we see the holism from our fragment. We're going to look at fragments. That's how the mind works. The mind loves to chop things up and see fragments. Besides, we only got 2 eyes. We can only take in so much at a time. We have to go 360. We have to move around. Okay, and it takes us a little bit of time to gather that whole 360 picture. But that is a very mature, powerful way to think that allows us to stay cohesively connected to love, to the holism, and to have perspective. Perspective is truly everything. Truly everything. And it allows us to be much wiser and to do things with a lot less remorse, because we can bring in more and more factors. Because it's not just this little tiny thing of this virus. It's the people who couldn't have surgeries. It's the people who are dying alone. It's what other diseases are out there. It's how can we shut everything down and still survive? I mean, I was listening to this one doctor the other day, and he was saying, he says, this doesn't make sense to me. I had to fly somewhere, and he says, and they had us standing 6 feet apart in the airport. He says, then I get into the plane, and I'm sitting 6 inches across from somebody. He says, there's no logic to that. He says, and yet, I'm still surviving. I've been on this trip. I've been on several plane trips, and I'm not getting sick. So where is this horrible threat? And he says, and I personally don't know anybody who died. I personally don't know anybody who's died from all of this.
I see just one comment. Vicky said two loved ones that died during the pandemic and died alone. I take it because of the pandemic.
No. I saw another post they died from, I think, cancer, wasn't it, Vicky? One of them I know died from cancer. But during the pandemic, which again robbed them of love.
During this critical time, yes. I personally had a family member pass away in an unrelated illness, and we weren't able to commemorate, memorialize, gather for my aunt in any capacity, and it really affects the family and the loved ones, and it's a very painful thing.
It is. And I just thought of something as you're saying it too. There was also all the family members and the loved ones who don't get to do what we do in Oneness, where we get to comfort each other during that very special time. That gets ripped away from us too. And these are powerful moments we'll never get back in time. Right. I mean, we're not going to... Right. And Vicky did confirm here that both of them died by chance. But they were robbed of this... of cancer. Okay, it says cancer. That's okay, Vicky. We got it. We love you, Vicky. And thank you for sharing that. That was a very beautiful, personal thing for you to share on a live stream broadcast with us, and we thank you for that. And that adds to our expression here of what's going forward into the world. And so I look at these other things that are not being included because we're not looking at a holism perspective, and I begin to see the things that we're not including are so much bigger than the deaths that even occurred and could potentially occur. Now that's perspective. We got to think about that. And I really don't comprehend why there's a lot of resistance to seeing the 360 on this. There's a lot at stake. Living our normal lives and to be loving and enjoy life again and to have a quality of life where it's human to human. I mean, we're talking about school and children. And that's another huge loss. We're talking about children being trained and taught that they cannot have interrelating communication skills and be near another human being. Do we really want to raise a generation of people who think people are expendable because they can't relate to them one-on-one? God, I'm thinking the answer to that is no. I wouldn't want to live in that world. I would not want to raise a beautiful child and train their mind to have a mind that would look that way at other human beings. Because that would be a very cold, very fragmented, very non-heart-centered world. And I can't imagine how explosive that would end up being. I mean, look at what's going on right now. And we have still yet a lot of heart in our world. And we still see some things that are just horrific, these riots. I think this is because we're not looking at the 360. And people are filled with fear. I mean, you cannot walk out in society and not see human beings, but see masks everywhere without getting the subconscious message, everybody is dangerous. Everybody is out to hurt you. Everybody will harm you. Maintain distance. Don't get near them. Oh, just saying that made my heart feel this. It started to contract. It hurt. My heart doesn't want that. My heart wants to blossom. I was asking my presence, help me. Give me something that helps me get the right focus on, because I'm going through a lot of healing, and as I'm healing, I see the world contracting. I'm wondering, why am I bothering? I'm about to be able to get more expression and go out into the world and try to help some families, maybe open up a great Montessori school again to help people set up a model for the future. And with all this going on, it looks like this would put an end to being able to touch things and touch people, and that's the very way in which we learn.
Tactile information and learning.
You know the beautiful picture my presence took me to? A blossoming rose. And not one that was tight, but full wide open. And it was, keep looking at this and blossom through this. Which also meant speak up. And one of the things that started blossoming was our going live. And is the book production. It's almost here, folks. We're just really working on the cover. The cover is so important, and it's so beautiful. And you guys are going to love it. It's just to give you the name again, it's The Heart and Soul of Parenting. Step-by-step skills to empower both parent and child. And it's about a new paradigm and way of helping your child have critical thinking skills and teaching through discipline, where it's not just be good, be bad, sit down. Teaches them how to have an inner loci of their own moral compass so that they can realize that they're in choice. Their behavior is a choice, and that their love center will always be with them. It's a beautiful thing. Very beautiful thing. And 2-year-olds get it. 1.5-year-olds get it. I mean, there's some great little stories we could tell about how young children embody this truth and can teach us the glory and the beauty of really having an open mind and looking at the Tao. Really, if a child can look at 2 choices within themselves as their inner conflict and choose the part that's their great self or their petty, contracted self, don't we want that at least same skill for us? And to apply that into everything we think and do? I think that cuts right to the chase and the core of why freedom is important. The understanding of freedom is so that we can be all who we can be. And that is dependent upon getting a good, clear 360 viewpoint. Because then we have clarity. Then we understand what we're doing. And then there's no of this silliness, like things that don't make sense. So much of the anger I see coming out in people right now is we're being asked to do things that don't even make sense. Science is even saying that's the wrong thing to do. Why are we doing it? Why are we mandating it? You know, we're hurting ourselves. I thought health was the key. Didn't you think health was the core on all this? Isn't when people say, well, we don't want to infect everybody, isn't the implication we're looking for everybody to be healthy? Then we have to look at the 360 to know what health really means, and some of these ideas that we may have bought into because they were well argued, but the premise was false. Or proof eventually made that premise be known to us as false.
Right.
You know, hey, let's we got to change. We got to, move with the information a little bit. If we really want to have a loving, beautiful, high-quality life, and that's what we're all about. And breathing our breath, beating our heart, getting all that electromagnetic stuff coming down the spine. That's for Jared and Nicole. Woo, and out to the nervous system. Talking to the whole body, going, yes. And, we have to really say, we have to respect the body's needs too. That's part of our love, right? We have our spirit, we have our body. Are we hurting the body by the way we're not fully understanding its 360 operation and honoring the way Mother Earth actually functions? We have enough science to tell us the whole story here, or a much bigger part of the story that gives us a much clearer perspective on what's going on, and we're not in the blind like we were 3 or 4 months ago. So let's come out of the blind so that we can lighten our hearts and start making some really good choices and realize the beauty of being free and celebrate that as part of our 4th of July celebration, is that we are in a country that can be free, and we must preserve it. Our liberty and our ability to be uniquely who we are allows every facet of that diamond of our presence to bring magnificence, brilliance to our life. I don't really want to see that light go out. Any closing words, anybody?
I think that's a good place to bring the show to an end.
Yeah, we're all smiling. Yeah, thank you. We love you. Tune in next week. And we're hoping to air at what time, Tyson?
3 o'clock. 3
We're
p.m. Central Standard.
So we're looking for 3. We thought 2. We might try for 2, but it looks like we keep landing at 3. We might have to listen to what the universe is putting before us. If you send us any feedback about the times that make it easier for you guys, let us know.
Yeah, and one change we'll likely make is proactively post about the time and the streaming platform and where you can find additional information.
And I want you all to spend a moment and send some of your love to Tryson for making this possible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because I can tell you right now, I have the heart and the desire, but I don't have the technical savvy to pull it off. And he's bringing that to the equation.
Bear with us as we build into our complete context,
yes.
Final form.
And really, we'd love to hear more from your participation, even through the weeks, to be posting at the different places and the sites. I know I'm not getting it up on my website yet, because there's a lot of stuff that's being worked out, and because I'm not the mover and shaker for getting that part done. And there's a lot of decisions to make, and I got to be honest, I've been pretty much referring and deferring all my decisions to making sure the book goes through its final publishing stage and gets to the live market for you. And quite frankly, I can only handle one major manifesting project at a time.
But for the future, we will likely be interacting on YouTube,
Cool.
Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch are all the platforms we're live on today.
Cool.
And for any messages or likes, retweets, shares, I'll monitor and give you feedback.
I somewhat understand what he was talking
I'll
about,
forward,
but I
I'll
know it's
forward
good.
all the feedback.
Great. Alrighty. Well, till next week on the Edge of Truth.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.